What's up, everybody? Welcome into Tom Curran's Patriots Talk podcast, joined as always by the Senator, Phil Perry. We got plenty to get to. Yeah, we know what happened Saturday night. We know what's going to happen going forward. The Patriots aren't a part of the postseason. How do they get back there? We're going to get into it right now. All right, folks, we've got a few things to get to today. Phil, how you doing?
Doing great.
Good.
We're good. Let's go.
Let's get an action plan out here, okay? 3-point action plan I have. How good is Mac Jones? The J.C. Jackson conundrum, a cap look, and a quick breeze through the free agents. We're going to try and cram all this in about 30 minutes, okay? So let's not get to wasting time, which is what I'm doing. Phil, action plan. First step for me, keep tweaking the staff. Patriots tweaked their personnel group last year in the wake of Nick Caserio's departure. They got 4 guys collaborating, and you had a good yield in free agency and a good yield in the draft. Now do it with the coaches. Who does what on defense? You have Bill Belichick, who's the greatest mind in defensive coaching history. You have his son, Steve Belichick, who appears to be a play caller. You have Gerard Mayo, who I'm told does a hell of a lot and runs a lot of the meetings. And then there's Matt Patricia with the cans on, giving advice, overseeing in some ways, perhaps advising, maybe consulting. Who's in charge over there? Meanwhile, on the coaching staff, Ernie Adams, who was a selfless helper of all coaches on all fronts, able to do whatever was necessary, is gone. Who stepped into his shoes to help the coaches? Dante Scarnecchia, an old lion, gone. Ivan Fears could be gone. So there's a lot of light resumes on the Patriots coaching staff, a lot of guys who've gotten there through connections, a lot of people who came up through the Patriot system. Bill is a forward thinker and he evolves, but the Patriots are a quarantined place. They don't have a lot of outside ideas. So they have to evolve that defense, Phil, in my estimation, and do it in lockstep with personnel. And you can't do it with 260-pound linebackers. Help me. Is that, you okay with the keep tweaking the staff aspect? Let's not get caught up in the linebackers.
Well, here's the thing about the staff. And it is interesting because I feel like they're in a place there where, like, you can't go back to the early portion of Bill Belichick's tenure and say, well, they were a young staff then too, because they really weren't, right? I mean, it was Romeo and Charlie and Ivan Fears and Dante Scarnecchia. And I mean, you had a lot of really
Dick Rabine,
accomplished guys. Dick Rabine, right? So do you keep them in their places, Tom, though, to allow them to grow into something better? Or do you tweak to try to squeeze more juice out of the lemon, understanding tweakage could also lead to some growing pains?
Mm-hmm.
That to me is one question. Do you feel like you have longtime coaches on your staff right now, and they're just starting to get into who they are in that profession? So that's just one sort of big picture question I have about it. The other thing is, Tom, the tweaking might be done for you with Gerard Mayo, at least.
Right.
And maybe that clears some things up in terms of what people's roles are inside the building.
Undeniably, the Patriots have developed some outstanding coaches. There's no splitting hairs about Eric Mangini's ability as a defensive coach, or Josh McDaniels' ability as an offensive coach. Brian Daboll is an offensive coach. Flores is a good defensive coach. I'm not going to include Patricia there because what he presided over here was not, especially in the later years, what I would call a great defense. 2017 being a shining example in the playoffs, and then when he presided over in Detroit. And that's why when I see these El Foldos on defense down the last 5 weeks, and I see Matt Patricia anywhere near a coaching box, it sends a shiver up my spine. But the Patriots can develop coaches and have done so. But in a way, it reminds me of when the Patriots became a little over. Sometimes Bill doesn't cast the widest net. Whether it was Urban Meyer, the affinity for him at Florida, followed by the affinity for Rutgers and Greg Schiano and people that Steve knew well. Yeah, there were good yields. Harmon was a good player. McCourty was excellent. Jason McCourty was, did his role very well. We can keep rolling through it, but are there other thinkers out there who can bring novel concepts to the Patriots? And that's old dog, new tricks stuff for a guy who's going to be 70 in April.
Well, and what's interesting though is, and this is how they've done it for so long, right? Bill Belichick has always wanted to promote from within. And so this is always something that they've had to combat. And they do try to bring in outside ideas, but it's not full-time on the staff usually, I think, right? It's you bring in Lincoln Riley for a week in the spring, or you bring in Chip Kelly to watch practice and see how you operate behind the scenes. And there's an exchange of ideas.
Yep.
You talk.
It all filters through Bill.
Right. Well, and I think there's plenty of like inner staff mingling there and shared meetings where there are things that are put on the table. I mean, we know Bill Belichick has a close relationship with Kevin Kelly, who we've had on podcasts here before. So he's not afraid to look elsewhere for ideas, but those guys aren't often on the staff, unless it's, Brett Bielema or, Mike Lombardi, I guess but even he is, he's obviously a longtime Belichick.
Yeah. That's what I'm kind of saying is he is a forward thinker, and he evolves and evolves and evolves. He creates, garners new ideas. And, but I think when you have so many people who grew up in your system, they're going to share all lines of thinking with you. And I just think if we look at the personnel group post Caserio, and the Patriots thought that went really well for them with a different approach, perhaps apply that to the coaching staff in general. I mean, Scarnecchia left, and who's the offensive line coach? It's not Greg Popovich.
Greg Popovich,
Carmen Brasillo,
a Hall of Fame basketball coach. Carmen Brasillo is Cole Popovich was the co-assistant coach who did not coach this year.
Did I say Greg Popovich?
Yeah.
I did not.
Yes, you did, but it's okay.
No, I didn't. I know
Cole is related to Greg, and Cole had to take the year off, I believe. No, because he didn't want to get vaccinated. Right. So
that's a lot for Carmen Brasillo to keep up with. And I'm not saying the offensive line was a problem, but Isaiah Wynn's an issue. Be that as it may, Mike Pellegrino coaching corners, right?
Yep.
It's a lot to put on the plate of, a former lacrosse coach who's got, hasn't been doing it for years and years and years. I think Steve Belichick is widely respected. He's paid every due that he needs to pay. I think Brian Belichick has been in the system long enough and around football long enough. He knows what he's doing. I don't think those guys are problems. I think that the defense has to philosophically evolve a little bit. But now I'm getting too far away from where I wanted to be, Phil. Go ahead. We're going to close that.
Let's close it then. Let's move on. Did you want to get into the heavier linebackers thing, or like how you change? Okay.
No, that's
plenty of time to discuss that stuff.
You got my number 2 on the action plan. I'm going to let you introduce it and let's talk about it.
You're assuming I'm looking at the action plan right now. I actually do. It says go get the go-to player.
Yeah.
Dante Scarnecchia spoke to our friend Karen Garegian of the Boston Herald. He said Mac needs a binky Tom, and he's talking about a slot receiver because he said, hey, they've always had somebody like Wes Welker or Julian Edelman or Danny Amendola, and they don't really have that guy right now. I think he likes Jacoby Myers, but he's saying what we've been saying for a long time, which is Jacoby Myers is good in the slot. He's just a very different kind of slot receiver than they've had, and they don't have that guy who can get open within 2 yards of the line of scrimmage right now.
Simple. Really, really simple. And even when we think about it, James White would have made a massive difference for the Patriots this year. And we could, what about Bolden? Fine. He was fine, but he is on screens necessarily. You know what I mean? Throw it to him when he's on the move. He's not going to be an option route runner in the same way a James White or a Julian Edelman will be. This was a developing route team in terms of you're going to run to your spot and the ball arrives there. I don't think that there was a lot of post-snap, okay, what's he going to do? Okay, he's going to work off the linebackers, leverage this way, here he is, boom. I don't think that happened a lot this year, but they need somebody to do that. And the acknowledgement has to be made, too, that these kinds of players who are dynamic, who are not, when we say go get a number 1 receiver, it's so friggin' tired to me because it evokes a player who's 6'2", 220, looks like A.J. Brown or N'Keal Harry or A.J. Green, and I don't want that. I want Deebo Samuel. I want Cooper Kupp. I want Julian Edelman. I want Hunter Renfrow. I want Braxton Berrios. You don't need a number one. You need that particular human, fast, small area type player who can be relied on 3rd and 4. Phil.
Here's the thing. I think you need both. And it's
Both.
not the quote unquote number one, but they have roles within the receiving room, right? So there's the slot role, which Jacoby Myers has. And Jacoby Myers is a restricted free agent, by the way. The Patriots have a decision to make there in terms of what kind of tender they want to place on him. But if you move him away from the slot because you'd rather a Braxton Berrios type, or, you want to go and draft Slade Bolden out of Alabama on day 3, which I would be all for. I think he'd work well in this offense. Well, now you have to find another role for Jacoby Myers. And so Jacoby Myers is more of an interior guy, but he can play a little bit on the outside. Okay, so he's a Z, right? Which is what Julian Edelman played a lot. They sent him in motion a lot. He could play a little bit outside, a little bit inside. All right, well, now you got Kendrick Bourne, who's probably
kick him out where Aguilar was.
Okay, is he a true X? That to me is the question. Do you worry about Kendrick Bourne? Does he give opposing defensive coordinators issues at night when their head hits the pillow? Because I think he's a good player. I don't know if he's going to win a ton of man-to-man matchups against an opposing team's best corner. So that's the issue to me, is the roles are tough to figure out right now. And I don't think Nelson Aguilar is the answer at the X role, which is your outside the numbers guy. He doesn't have to be your number one, doesn't have to be your best player, but can he give you more than 37 catches? I mean, you said it earlier this year. Nelson Aguilar was sort of Philip Dorsett, right? Can't you get a little bit better than that outside and get better inside?
You can, but there's core? And we're going to get into the cap numbers a little later. There's a fat cap attached to Aguilar. You'll be carrying some dead money if you move on from him, but there is savings there. Whereas with Hunter Henry, Jonnu Smith, Matt Judon, those guys you're not releasing them. They're here, which is fine for all.
Right. Not that you should, but Jonnu Smith, I think people will be like, oh, can we save some money there? No, you can't. He's here. Yeah. Sorry.
But I do think that getting that go-to player as opposed to getting that number one is critical. Finally, number 3 in the action plan, and there's so many things they could do, but here's number 3 I had. You may have to get dumber on defense. Make the hard decisions. You can't keep bringing back Jamie Collins and Dante Hightower and Jawan Bentley, who's an unrestricted free agent. You may have to have guys who don't have the same level of institutional knowledge but can play dynamically. Duggar and Judon are a start. Christian Barmore is a start. So you have a linebacker. Excuse me. You have an interior defensive lineman. You have a pass rusher, and you have a safety. You're going to have to. Those are building blocks. I look at J.C. Jackson. You might have to get worse overall at that position on paper.
I agree. I think, Tom, when you look at this league now, it's okay to just get by on that side sometimes. It really is. If you are good enough on the other side. I want to just rattle off some rankings for you real quickly of other teams in the conference right now and where they are defensively in terms of DVOA, which is, we can talk about that measure all we want, but it is a widely used measure, and it tries to factor in the overall efficiency of your opponents. So when you have a great performance against a bad offense, that doesn't help you as much as a great performance against a good one. Anyway, we could talk to Aaron Schatz about that someday. The Patriots were 4th in the league in DVOA on defense. The Bills were number 1. So good for them. They look like a team that's going to be really hard to beat right now. The Titans were 12th. The Bengals were 19th. The Chiefs were 24th. The Chargers and Ravens, who we think are going to be contenders for the foreseeable future in the conference, though they didn't make the playoffs this year, were 26th and 28th this year. Patriots are number 4, and look where that got them, Tom. I just think when you look at those other teams, because they're so good offensively, the Bengals and the Chargers in particular, the Chiefs, the Chargers were kind of sniffing the playoffs just because of their offense. It's because of their offense. And they've loaded up and they've helped their quarterbacks be great quarterbacks by who they've put around them. So that to me is the big picture question facing them this offseason. Do you go and fix your defense, which couldn't stop a nosebleed late in the season? Or do you say, we can figure it out on that side. We can scheme it up well enough. We really need to add to our offense, because if we can't keep pace on the scoreboard with these teams, we can't contend.
Well, that's the thing, is you have to get faster though. So that, I mean, at the very least, the scheming it up that might be something that Bill never loses from his DNA. And I think that there were decisions during this season that illustrated that he thought his defense was better than it was. Include the 4th and 1 at your own 34, 4th and a long one, where the Patriots decided to punt down 14-0 already. In a game plus, they already hadn't allowed the Bills to punt. And by the end of the drive upcoming, they hadn't allowed them to punt either. And by the end of the night, they still hadn't made them punt. That was a place to go for it, because the defense was too slow to deal with Josh Allen. You look at the Dallas game, they're on their way to allowing almost 600 yards of offense. They're at midfield and overtime. They punt. Dallas predictably sprinted down the field and won the game with a touchdown in overtime. Defense isn't good enough. You can't scheme it up. They're too slow. They're not dynamic enough. Might have happened even if the guys were younger and dumber, but they might have to get younger and dumber to get faster. Fair?
Linebacker, I think, is the spot to look at, right? Because both of those guys that play off the line are unrestricted free agents this year. And so that might be that. Maybe it's Cam McGrone, who they drafted in the 5th round last year and is hurt, but is a pretty good athlete. Maybe he ends up playing a real role for you. Maybe Terez Hall comes back, and I don't know. He's not a great athlete himself, but he's a little bit younger. Maybe he's got fresher legs. I don't know, Tom. I think you just have to. I think speed is important. I just think it's okay to try to get by. It is possible to get by without high-priced guys all over the field on that side of the ball. And the Bills are showing it. The Bills probably the weakest cornerback group in the playoffs right now.
Mm-hmm.
And they're still a great defense because they've got great safeties. They've got really good linebackers, fast linebackers. They get people that can get after the quarterback. So you can make up for some holes with what you have at other spots. And that I think is something they might have to just be okay with, because they don't have a ton of money to spend, and there's not going to be easy answers this offseason for every spot on that defensive side that you're trying to fill.
Take a look at that Bills linebacker group too. Tremaine Edmonds, one of the fastest linebackers in the league. Milano, very fast. And is it Klein?
Mm-hmm.
Klein, pretty fast, but Milano is a 230-pound, 6-foot linebacker, and he can make some dynamic plays. But Edmonds is, I'd say he's a gold standard, but they have to get faster at the linebacker level. Would have been interesting if Micah Parsons and Mac Jones were on the board at the same time.
It really would have been. I don't know.
The Patriots have been better if they took Micah Parsons than Mac Jones.
No.
What if they had Micah Parsons and Teddy Bridgewater?
Now we're talking. Now I don't know. I still doubt it, but that's where you start to get close. If it's Micah Parsons and Jimmy Garoppolo on a new contract, now all of a sudden you're probably still in the playoffs right now.
I cannot sign on to the Jimmy Garoppolo swelling that's going on around here.
Oh, neither can I. It's
insane.
There's Jones, right?
There was an outrageous amount of could have had that guy. What about Jimmy? No, he's gonna break again. I like him too, and I think he's a pretty good player most of the time. He gets the ball out quick. He has some brain farts, but nothing resembling Kyler Murray's. Kyler Murray might have just submitted one of the worst playoff performances at the quarterback position of all time.
That was a disaster. Jimmy Garoppolo does. He's an accident waiting to happen. Physically,
imagine betting on Arizona
mentally.
Last night.
No, can't.
Yeah, I don't have to. Imagine
if you had done that. I mean, they were telling you for the last month and a half of the season that they weren't very good. So I hope.
Yeah, but if some guy teased him and got 9.5.
Yeah, no, I get it. So that's on you. Were you that some guy?
Phil, enough with the action plan. Now on to Mac Jones. They have the guy that they're wedded to for the next 5 years. But there's some work that needs to go into surrounding him with better players because he has the acumen and the accuracy, but not the arm strength and the mobility. He's got the two harder things to gain, which is the smarts and the accuracy. But how do they capitalize on those other aspects that he is average in?
I think you just surround him with as much talent as you can. And I think it should be a priority this offseason. Give him the pieces he needs to succeed. And if he doesn't take that leap, well, then now you've got more information on that guy. So as you're saying, Tom, maybe he's your guy for the next 3 or 4, but he's not necessarily the guy for the next 10. Because if you surround him with a lot of talent and it still doesn't quite end up where you would like it to, then you've got more information. But
right.
I don't think you have to look all that far. I continue to come back to this Joe Burrow example. And I understand that if you really look closely at their college trajectories, Burrow, even though he was loaded up with talent at LSU, even more so than Mac Jones was his senior year, because Mac Jones was without Jalen Waddle for a good chunk of that year, be that as it may. Joe Burrow, the advanced numbers, Tom, they say he was more accurate because he threw into a lot tighter windows and was more successful in those types of throws. And he ended up being the number 1 overall pick. But I still look at both these guys and I say, neither one of them has a really strong arm. Neither one of them is a great athlete. Mac Jones, they actually had 41 and 40 rushing attempts respectively. And Mac Jones averaged more per carry. I don't know how many of those are actual carries, right?
Mm-hmm.
But neither is a great athlete. They're both accurate. They're both smart. They're both tough. Why can't Mac Jones make the kind of leap Joe Burrow made in his second year? Why can't he? You tell me. I don't understand it. I think the perspective nationally
top 10
Mac
draft
Jones,
pick to spend on a wideout.
Well, and the Patriots don't have that, right?
That's the thing.
But can you add a piece and not maybe get Joe Burrow borderline MVP, but maybe get Mac Jones into the sniffing the top 10 range?
Absolutely.
I'm not ruling that out.
No, because it has to be the complement of wideouts. It has to be the complement of wideouts, tight ends, and backs out of the backfield. It's 5 guys are in the route. Who's going to make a defensive coordinator say, oh, crap, Brandon Bolden didn't do it. Kendrick Bourne probably didn't do it. The scariest person on the Patriots offense, aside from Mac Jones this year, was Josh McDaniels, which was, what's he going to do? What's he going to do to try and undress us scheme-wise? And if he didn't, you were in a good spot. So they have to add somebody. Troy Brown was a pain in the ass to cover, followed by Deion Branch, who couldn't be covered, followed by Randy Moss. We know what he was all about. Followed not that long after by Rob Gronkowski and Aaron Hernandez and Wes Welker, giving way to Julian Edelman, and the Gronk era continued. Those are players who were very, very difficult, nay, impossible to cover. When the Patriots don't have that player, 06, 13, even though Edelman was there, it was his first year as a good player. Edelman got hurt in 15. I think Gronk was banged up in 15 as well. It changes everything. So you have to even give Mac Jones a Brady-esque chance, not of being a Hall of Famer and the most decorated player of all time, but of experiencing some 12 and 4 seasons, you have to find somebody who's going to make a defensive coordinator pee his pants. Simple. It's not Mac Jones is bad. Nope. He's not noodle-armed. He's not immobile. He's got to get better. J.C. Jackson, next up on the docket. Franchise him. If he doesn't like it, franchise him and trade him.
Option number 2 there is something that I could foresee. I just look at their cap situation right now, Tom, and it's complicated. They have very little money, it looks like, to spend. And even if you make a bunch of moves, and maybe there are even a couple of difficult releases in there to save money, you give J.C. Jackson the franchise tag at that cornerback spot, you're talking about $17-ish million. That looks like it would be the vast majority of any cap space you're able to clear. So is he worth it? Is he worth not being able to, for instance, even retain somebody like Jacoby Myers on a restricted free agent tag that's any higher than the quote unquote original round tender where he was an undrafted guy. So it's, it's just a couple $1 million. But if you want to give him the second round tender, then I think you're talking 4. And then if it's first round, which I don't think they would do, but that would be more than 5. Still a good deal for somebody like Jacoby Myers, a productive receiver for you. That's pretty cheap.
Yep.
But if you're spending all your money on one corner because you feel like if you don't have that guy, you're in real trouble, then those are the kinds of decisions you're talking about having to make. And so the closer I look at their financial situation, I'm not ruling it out that they could bring him back on the tag, but it's not easy. It's not an easy call, in my opinion.
Look at some of these numbers on the cap. These are all cap numbers that projected to carry into 2022. Nelson Aguilar, 15 million. Hunter Henry, 15 million. Matt Judon, 16.5 million. Jonnu Smith, 13.7 million. Devon Godshot, 10.2 million. And Isaiah Wynn, 10.4. You're not getting away from Isaiah Wynn's number. You've already guaranteed that by picking up his 5th-year option. You're not getting away from Jonnu Smith or Matt Judon or Hunter Henry, nor would you most likely want to, because in releasing them, you'd save a lot, but you'd also be taking, for instance, $12 million in dead money with Jonnu Smith. You just suck it up and go. $8 million would be the savings on Matt Judon. You're not even thinking about it. He was hurt at the end of the year. $4 million but Aguilar, you could have $5 million of savings, which would carry $10 million against the cap if you cut him before June 1st. So you don't have a lot of latitude there at all, really, right, Phil? You're looking at it too?
I'm looking at it too right now. And, if you're talking pre-June 1 cuts.
Yeah, I didn't start playing with that. Over the cap, by the way, is where we go for the best graphics in terms of looking up at the Patriots and seeing how different things would fall together post June 1's, after June 1 trades and cuts.
Right. So some of the guys that you could save the most on if you were to release them before June 1st, Shaq Mason would save you a little over $7 million. Jonathan Jones would save you 6.2. You mentioned Aguilar already. That's a $5 million savings, even though it's a bunch of dead money. Kyle Van Noy, $5 million. Dietrich Wise, 2.5, even though that's another good chunk of dead money there. Those are important players to you. Lawrence Guy, 3.75. I mean, that's good savings with only $750,000 of dead money. But I don't know. Are they going to be all that excited to get rid of Lawrence Guy, who played a ton of snaps for them and is really the leader on that defensive line? It's hard. So again, these are the kinds of situations. If you want to free up enough money to be players, not only in free agency or via trade, I know a lot of people out there are hungry for Calvin Ridley. That's $11 million, base salary. You're absorbing that whole thing if you want to make a trade for that guy. So now you got to find that money somewhere else. So are you willing to release Jonathan Jones and Kyle Van Noy to get Calvin Ridley? Maybe you are, but those are the kinds of decisions that are going to come into play here this offseason as you reshape your team. Yeah.
And now you're worse at slot corner and you've lost one of your Kyle Van Noy's is a pretty decent coverage linebacker who can pass rush as well. Yep. I mean, Kyle Van Noy for the large part of this season might have been their best front seven, or he's one of the top 3 front 7 defenders. Fair?
Definitely. Yeah. I thought, there were a few games he was one of the few guys who really showed up and played that first Buffalo game. I thought he was their best player, he and Christian Barmore. So, or not the first one, the second one. I call it the first one in my mind because I don't know, the wind game gets all jumbled up in there. But anyway, some difficult decisions ahead. You want to keep JC Jackson. You want to keep Jacoby Myers. You want to keep Trent Brown, who's used to making a lot of money at that tackle spot. Like, you're going to have to find that money somewhere. Miguel Benzan, Tom, has the Patriots for basically $2 million available to them in free agency at the moment. So you got to clear space somehow.
Got to clear space somehow. And to sign JC Jackson, franchise him, that would more than gobble that up. So moves will have to be made. That's the cost of shopping, man. That's the cost of, as Robert Kraft said last March, the way to build is through the draft. And the Patriots are kind of reaping what they sowed with draft misses, especially, for instance, if you want to throw out some specifics, the 2019 draft, you have N'Keal Harry, useless in terms of football contributions, and same thing with Joanne Williams. Those are your first 2 picks that year, correct?
And then your 3rd round pick was Chase Winovich, who was inactive the other night.
You can't just pee away the top of a draft. Free agents. We got Devin McCourty, Trent Brown, Dante Hightower, James White, J.C. Jackson, Matthew Slater, Jawan Bentley, Brandon Bolden, Nick Folk, Jamie Collins, Brian Hoyer, Jacoby Myers, Gunnar Olszewski. So we haven't even delved into these are players the Patriots would need to spend money to retain and which ones they would want to. So those are guys. I mean, if Miguel's got a $2 million, over the cap has it at 13, but there's probably things that are pending. I trust Miguel a little bit more. Not that I don't trust him. You get my point.
He's very up to date on things like the incentives that have been earned that haven't, officially maybe hit the cap yet.
Right.
But
so
he's on top of it.
With $2 million, I mean, what are you doing? I mean, what can you do? First, you have to lop, and then you have to re-sign. And there's two, who would you say goodbye to these very good and important cultural touchstones? Slater sounds like he's done. Like Dev is weighing it every year. Hightower seemingly, Phil.
I don't know. Matthew Slater sounded one way after the game the other day, and then he went on the radio earlier this week and said he felt pretty good. So I think he's still considering things too. I would try to figure out a way to keep one or two of those three guys that you just mentioned, because that's just, I know they openly talk about passing the torch to the next group. I just am not 100% sure who that next group is right now. I think it's Mac Jones. I think it's Damian Harris. David Andrews is still around and under contract.
Kyle Duggar.
I guess. Is he
Hunter Henry,
Hunter Henry, I would put him in there.
Barmore.
I'm thinking of leaders, Tom.
I'm
thinking of cultural touchdowns as you mentioned. I don't know. So
I think Bentley has elevated. That's the thing, is Bentley, I think, has kind of elevated to that level among the group. And he was hurt toward the end of the year. I thought he was good at the beginning of the year. I thought he was their best linebacker before, for a long stretch.
I agree. He was a good player earlier this year. So maybe.
But then you're a $7 or $8 million linebacker. I mean, it's time for Jawan Bentley to get paid fairly well.
So that's actually one where they might be able to get a deal, though, because there's just not a huge market for guys like him.
Mm-hmm.
He's a first and second down linebacker. Patriots love those guys. I don't know. There are some Patriots themed defenses across the league, so maybe they would value him. Wherever Brian Flores ends up, does he want Jawan Bentley? Maybe he does. But maybe that's a guy you can bring back relatively inexpensively. When you talk about outside of those guys, Tom, is there anybody they need to desperately bring back for the football product alone? I would say Trent Brown is in that conversation, and I think he wants to be here. And he sounded like a guy who wasn't all that concerned with being the most highly paid guy in the world this offseason. But he made $9 million this year. And I don't know, you can't bring him back can you bring him back for less than that? Maybe you can. And I'd be open to that. I think he's good for them, but that might be one that you just have to swallow hard and say, Trent, we love you, but we're going to stick with Micah Wenu at tackle because
I think you might have to say that because you never know when Trent Brown's going to be unavailable for 5 games or 6 games or 8 games. I mean, he missed how many at the start of this year because of a calf that was suffered in training camp?
It was a lot. I think it was 6 or 7.
Yeah. I think James White, weirdly enough, might be the one guy I look at on that list and say, if he is back with what he was, bring him back, because until you find who is going to be the quick opening, you get what I'm saying. The stuff we're talking about at the top.
Oh, right. Okay. You're talking receivers too, until you get either a back or a receiver who can do that.
You need that guy. So we're going to put a cork in this one, folks.
Okay. Let's do it.
Next Pats, you got that this week, right, Philly?
Yeah, Tom, we got next Pats. We're working on some good guests for you. We're going to be looking ahead. We're going to be looking a little bit at the draft, but just kind of big picture. What can you do to beat the Bills specifically? Because that's going to be an issue for them.
Love it. I'm going to get Kevin Clark from The Ringer to talk about the NFL playoffs in general and the outside perspective on the Patriots. We'll talk to you later in the week. Love you guys. Bye.